we were so especially happy to have Tammy here. I mean, to get to have Tammy operate as Shalichat Tzibor is such a treat, and thanks for answering the call. It was such an added pleasure to have you here. Yishur kochech. And I know that how much time do we have? About 3 minutes. I'm trying to be mindful. I think we could probably start 2 or 1 minute early. And I don't want to say anything that Tammy might say, but I have 120 seconds. Are you planning to talk about the history at the Kotel at all? Like, no.
Do whatever,
You'll play out.
Talk about it.
Good.
I'll make up for the things.
Good. And you can disagree with anything I say. Hey, Rabbi doesn't have it quite right. I say that all the time. But just as a reminder that, we know from history that at the Kotel prior to 1948, men and women prayed there, bringing their individual prayers. There was no mechitza, there was no separation. We have lots of testimonies of people saying that guy would sit there and pray, and the women would go over and pray, and they would talk to him, and he would talk to them. And as you know, in the Bible itself, the Hebrew Bible, there's no separation of men and women and children in prayer. So, as Yovel Noah Harari points out, the ultra-Orthodox and fundamentalists have a way of saying that when we change something, trust me, it's been that way all the way through. We also don't have mechitza really attested to until the time of the the rise of Islam and in those countries. And so, but even at the Kotel itself, it was not viewed as a synagogue. And so it was really only after 1948 that the discussion rose, and really only after the Six-Day War in 1967 when this Kotel was captured. And at that time, Levi Eshkol and Moshe Dayan actually wanted to turn the area over to the Parks Authority, because is the Kotel a synagogue, or is it belong to the whole people as a part of a park? There's even a very famous Talmudic text that is used for other purposes. It's not a halachic story, it's an Agadah, but it also says one is forbidden from even praying in a ruin. So we wonder why that doesn't apply to the ruin of ruins. And so it was only then that, unfortunately, that the religious authority insisted on taking it over, and maybe things would have been very different, I should say, not so difficult, if Moshe Dayan and Levi Eshkol had been successful in transferring to the Parks Authority, because it's really a national monument. Of course, things have radically changed even since then. And that leaves us where we are today. Some rabbis are famous for quoting Kol B'Isha Erva, which is a very strange statement that a man should not pray in the presence of a singing woman. And the halachic history of that is not at all what people say it is. I mean, it's an offhand comment that is not halachic in the Talmud, but is in a discussion about if a man is saying Kriyat Shema, whether a woman's voice would distract him from the kavanah necessary. But it's not codified there, but it is codified here and there in other places that just for Kriyat Shema. A man has to repeat it if a woman has been singing because it's distracted. But then in the early 1800s, it was one Orthodox rabbi said, no, women's voices are distracting to men in general, and here we find ourselves. I remember that when Anat Hoffman, several years ago when I heard her speak and was speaking with her afterward, and she said, I remember the first year that women were forbidden from singing in the Israeli military choir at Yom HaAtzmaut. And that she was on the Jerusalem City Council, and she was by one of the senior chief rabbis, I hate calling them that. And she said, well, can I ask you a question? Last year it was perfectly fine that they were singing, and this year they are not allowed to sing. Can you give me the halachic source for it? And he leaned over and he said, Moses on Mount Sinai. We only say that when we have no halachic source. So it's my honor to introduce Tammy Gottlieb at this time. We're so honored to have her here. She's vice chair of the board of Women of the Wall. Tammy will be speaking about her challenges for the rights of women from all denominations to pray according to their custom at the Kotel. Raised in Rehovot, Israel, and educated in a conservative home, Tammy has worked tirelessly to promote democracy and equality throughout the state. Even in her teenage years, Tammy was a key activist in the Noam youth movement, which is essentially the USY of Israel. She served in the IDF as a combat soldier in am I pronouncing right, the Karakal?
Yeah,
Karak?
it's called Karakal in English too.
Okay.
Google it after Shabbat.
I know it from a deck of cards from the biblical zoo I have, now that you remind me.
The name of it, never mind.
No, Karakal unit. And that is a co-ed infantry battalion. After her release from the army, she served in a variety of management positions at the Noam Youth Movement and the Masorti Movement, the conservative movement in Israel. She recently stepped down from her position as Associate Director of Communications and Initiatives at the Masorti Movement after a 17-year tenure. Today, she serves as the Director of Signing Anew, an Israeli NGO that supports social action organizations which work to promote the democratic values espoused in Israel's Declaration of Independence. And if that isn't enough, she serves on the governing body of the World Zionist Organization's Hostages and Hostage Families Directorate. Tammy has family in Brazil and England and holds a degree in political science and communications from Bar Ilan University. She is currently completing a master's degree in Jewish community leadership at the Schechter Institute for Jewish Studies. I think you should be teaching those courses. She serves in the reserves at the Home Front Command and currently calls Yerushalayim home. And now, let me hear thy voice. Let's welcome Tammy to the bima.
So thank you very much for having me. We publicized my my speaking under the name of Let Me Hear Thy Voice. About women and hearing women's voices. And I landed in the United States 10 days ago in Nashville. Okay, Nashville was the southernest town that I did in this visit. And I worked my way up to here through different cities. And I was telling Levana before, I landed and I lost my voice. For the first 3 days of my tour in the United States, in Nashville and then in Kentucky, I didn't have a voice. So I did, and there was something so powerful and so frustrating about just not having a voice, literally. I was like, and I couldn't, I succeeded somehow. I don't know, I pity the people that had to listen to me. It wasn't a very nice, experience, I think, but maybe it was okay. But so being able to stand here 10 days later and lead services is really empowering for me. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. And I feel very, I have. You have. I'll give you a backup one. Thank you. After you say that. Thank you, exactly. I feel very fortunate, so thank you. So I start my evening with feeling fortunate for my voice and for the hospitality, so thank you. So I'll repeat a bit about myself, and if I'm boring you, so just boo me off. So I did grow up in a conservative home in Israel. So I'm one of these unique creatures, conservative Israeli born and raised Jew. Not many like me in Israel in my generation. My parents are both immigrants from Brazil and England. They moved to Israel. They both worked in the Weizmann Institute. That's where they met. And they looked for a place where they have their holy life. They looked for a synagogue, both coming from liberal backgrounds, from the diaspora. There was only one non-Orthodox synagogue in Rehovot, the town where I grew up, and that's Adat Shalom Immanuel, a conservative synagogue, the one where my naming was, the one where my sister's naming was. We're only sisters, so there's something even more natural about being part as a family to be together in a egalitarian synagogue when you only have, my father only has daughters, so it's always been a very wonderful family experience. My bat mitzvah was in that synagogue. In Israel, when you go to school, you have to choose either you go to a secular school or to a religious school. A religious school in Israel is an Orthodox school. And my parents sent me to a secular school because they didn't want me to have to, be separated from boys. They wanted me to live in an egalitarian situation. But living in the secular society in Israel when I had my bat mitzvah when I was 12, I'm a September-born child, so my bat mitzvah was just after I started a new school with a new class. And when I invited all the kids from my class to my bat mitzvah, no one from the kids of my class would dare to come to a conservative synagogue to hear a girl in her bat mitzvah. Now, this has a few reasons with the Israeli secular public. I think one reason, two very different reasons. So obviously it's not the kids that made the decision, it's their parents. And in Israel there's such a resentment towards religion. We'll get to that in a moment, but why there's resentment. But there is state and religion are so connected that people have this kind of, are a bit scared of sending their kids to a synagogue, any synagogue. They don't want their kids to be religious. They don't want their kids to have any religious ideas in their heads, because there's such a bad PR for religion, for Judaism, in Israel. And so I think half of my class didn't come because of that, because you don't go to synagogues. I think the other half didn't come because, in Israel, again, there's a perspective for secular Jews in Israel that if you're doing Judaism, you need to do it the right way. The right way in Israel is the Orthodox way, okay? So seeing a young girl doing her bat mitzvah is something outrageous, and you can't send your kid to see something like that, so that's the Israel I grew up in, understanding my unique situation, loving it, okay? From the age of 12, when I first stood on a bima, I found my voice. I started leading services. I have a strong voice, I don't know. I was blessed with a strong voice, so I started leading services very close after my bat mitzvah. I was part of the Noam youth movement, again, the youth movement of the conservative movement from the 3rd grade. But growing up as a liberal Jew in Israel, you understand that liberal Judaism in Israel is not equal to other Jewish experiences. And I grew up understanding this and understanding that I am living some reality that people around me don't deal with. The synagogue I go to, I love, that shaped me and shaped my Jewish identity and shaped my feministic identity and shaped my identity. That synagogue is not recognized by the authorities in the Israeli state, in the Jewish state, as a synagogue, because it's a conservative synagogue. The rabbis that are conservative rabbis in Israel are not recognized by the state of Israel as rabbis, so they don't have the same rights. Some bureaucratical things that rabbis are allowed to do in Israel, they're not allowed to do because they're not recognized as rabbis. So the most obvious one is marriages. Conservative rabbis can't conduct marriages in Israel, can't do conversions, or their conversions aren't recognized. The rabbi that did my bat mitzvah was kind of famous in the Israeli public. He used to be an Orthodox rabbi, and then he moved to our synagogue, and he had this TV show for many years. And when I had my bat mitzvah, there was a newspaper article about him. So when I did the tefillin wrap on the Thursday before my bat mitzvah, came a photographer with him, and they took pictures, and they publicized the pictures in the newspaper. And after this photo of him doing a bat mitzvah or tefillin wrap to a 12-year-old girl, his rights to conduct marriages in Israel were revoked. Okay, because of me, not really because of me, but because of this photo. So that's the Israel I grew up in, and as youth movements very often do, and I think it succeeded with me. They try to make the young people that they educate activists, okay, to be the people that make the difference in the place, in the state, in the country. And I grew up holding this, like being an activist for state and religion issues from I wouldn't say the early age of third grade, but definitely when I was a teenager, I remember going to protests for these issues, for rabbis being able to conduct marriage ceremonies. Didn't work. We're still there, but we're still working on it. And I became like a state and religion activist. It became the thing that I want to change in Israel. I have a lot of family outside of Israel. I started learning about Jews in the diaspora as another large group after the army, but I always, holding this truth that the Jewish state is the only country in the Western world where Jews don't have Jewish freedom. Okay, Israel is the only country where Jews don't have Jewish freedom. We can't get married. We can't eat the kashrut we want. We can't. We only have one option. So knowing that, understanding that is a pivotal part of my life and something I've been working towards, changing or doing as good as I can to make a difference. And a few years after I was released from the army, a few months, I was working for the youth movement then as a senior staff member. I finished the army, I did my trip around the world like Israelis do. I came back and I started working for the youth movement. And I remember waking up one morning and hearing on the news that a woman was arrested in the Western Wall for having her talit on. And I understood that this is my calling, that this is, that I have to be part of this struggle, that I have to be part of this group that the woman was arrested from within, and I joined Women of the Wall. So this was 2008, 17 years ago, something like that. And I joined Women of the Wall in 2008, and I've been a member ever since. Women of the Wall existed 20 years before, started their first prayer in 1988, so almost 40 years now. There was a conference in Israel they called it the Feminist Religious Woman, okay? They had women from all over the world and from all denominations, Orthodox, conservative, reform women that came together, all defining themselves as feminists and as religious women. And they came together and they had this conference. It was a few days in a hotel in Jerusalem. And they understood that within these few days that the conference is going on, one of the days is Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the Jewish month. Now, Judaism has many traditions. One of the traditions is that Rosh Chodesh is a sisterhood celebration and the celebration of women. And they connected this all and they said, what a wonderful idea. Let's have a celebratory prayer for Rosh Chodesh during our conference. So again, 40 years ago, they're in a hotel in Jerusalem. They asked the hotel for a Torah scroll and a room to have their prayer. Unfortunately, the hotel manager couldn't give them one. There was a Torah scroll in the hotel, but the kashrut supervisor of the hotel was breathing down the manager's neck, saying, if you give them the Torah scroll, I'll have to revoke your kashrut supervision. Now, there is no connection between the kitchen and the Torah scroll, but the kashrut supervisor, the person in charge of kashrut in the hotel, has all the power. He's a monopoly. And if he wants to say, you have to do this, then the hotel manager can't risk his kashrut supervision. So he told the women that they can't, and they had to find a different opportunity, a different place, and they understood that it might be an opportunity, and they went to the women's section of the Kotel. So this was the morning of Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan in 1988. A group of a few dozen women walk into the women's section of the Kotel. They have a Torah scroll in a duffel bag and a folding table so they can read from the Torah. And they start praying in the women's section. And apparently the concept of women's voices was dramatic. For 20 years, since 1967, since the Kotel came back to Israeli hands, the women's section was silent. women would pray there, but silently, because they didn't pray in groups. The men prayed in groups, so that was a loud prayer, but the women always prayed silently. So this group coming there, not even realizing that what they're doing is a dramatic event. And this thing that they did, praying out loud, being voiced, the women's voices in the women's section of the Kotel, that created a commotion in that first Rosh Chodesh in 88. And when people felt uncomfortable with the women's voices, and what people did when they felt uncomfortable, the other people around them, was start attacking them. So women from the women's section yelling and trying to shush them and trying to stop them from praying out loud. Then the men started understanding something was going on and looked over the mechitza and saw and started also yelling and shouting, and chairs started being thrown, and they decided that they have to stop this, and they left. They didn't continue. They did half of the prayer, but they didn't even get the Torah scroll out of the duffel bag because they were afraid that something might happen to it. Within this group of these women, there were a few Israeli women that were part of the conference, and they were so embarrassed for the behavior of their fellow Israelis and how their friends from the diaspora were bullied out of the Kotel. And they decided to found Women of the Wall to make sure that women's voices can be heard, okay? That it's not unique when a woman wants to come and be heard in the women's section, when a woman wants to come and have a prayer in the women's section. And they made sure that women's voices are present in the Kotel every month ever since. So starting the month after, they founded Women of the Wall. They started coming every month, 7 in the morning for Shacharit, every Rosh Chodesh, for Shacharit, celebratory Shacharit prayer of women in the women's section. Women from all denominations, because also Orthodox women are okay with praying in a women's group. So Orthodox, Reform, conservative women praying together in the women's section of the Kotel. We would imagine that it would be easy, but it was never easy. Okay, two main groups that are in the core of the conflict with Women of the Wall's prayer is, first of all, the other people around that can't accept the concept of a woman praying out loud, of a woman praying with a talit on, of a woman praying with tefillin, or reading from the Torah. As knowing secular Israelis, it is something that is hard for them to see. They don't see it a lot. They don't go to synagogues where women do pray like this. So when they see it, they react in a sometimes violent way. But it's not only people, seeing this for the first time in their life and being surprised. Many times it's people that come specifically in order to stop the prayer of Women of the Wall, protesters. It's very easy to bring people to a protest or to fight against Women of the Wall prayer because our times are very specific. You can go into a website, from now till, we only write a year forward, but if we wanted, we could also write 5 years forward when we're coming to pray, and they come. And in the whole political climate of the last few years in Israel, when there's this need to fight against liberalism, Women of the Wall are like a symbol. Or when you're looking for a very easy group to protest against, then we're there. We're just there because we do it every month. So these people attacking us still attack us, and sometimes it's yelling and cursing, and sometimes it's even worse. We've gone through in the whole history of Women of the Wall, even in the 17 years that I've been there, through different acts of violence, also cursing and speaking. That's also violent, but even sometimes worse. I was attacked specifically a few times, bruised and spat at and things like that. Sometimes, I think the worst attack was a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when a group of young men ripped our prayer books. And that was awful. I think that was maybe one of the worst days that I experienced in Women of the Wall. And you know what you do when you're being attacked or when when someone is harming you, is that you go to the authorities. And from day one, from the first prayers of Women of the Wall being attacked, they went to the authorities. Now, the authorities are two. The first group of authority is the police, or, that are in charge of our safety. And the second is the Western Wall Heritage Fund, which is a body that runs the Western Wall, that was politically appointed in 1968, when the ultra-Orthodox parties in the Israeli Knesset understood that they have a good opportunity here to gain power. And they asked to be the ones running the Western Wall. That was a new thing. And the Israeli government, for many years, mostly doesn't care about issues of religion, and for many, many years just gave everything to the Orthodox. So this was also given to the Orthodox. Obviously, in the political system, they had to give something, but they got it. And they're the ones running the place, the Western Wall Heritage Fund. And the Western Wall Heritage Fund running the place are also not helping Women of the Wall. So if the police are not prosecuting the people that are attacking us, and they're not, okay, the attack that I said with the ripping of the prayer books happened 3 years ago. The case I got, I think, 2 months ago, a letter in the mail that the case is closed. The one guy that they charged, okay, there were 70 people there. They charged one guy, and they in the end didn't do anything with it because he's, poor and wants to enroll into the army. I don't know what, it was a stupid reason. But they're not being prosecuted, even for the really dramatic crimes. But the other thing is that from the beginning of Women of the Wall, what the authorities did, what the Western Wall Heritage Fund did to prevent the conflict between Women of the Wall and the other groups, is to remove Women of the Wall. They would say that because of Women of the Wall's presence, they're the ones breaking the rules of the place, and they should be removed. So throughout the 90s, they would just some women came, they would take them out. And then when I joined was because a woman was really arrested, was detained for a few hours because of the talit, and then it happened again in 2013. They would, and 12 and 13, they would arrest every month women for having a talit on while they're praying. And that actually, what went on in 2012 changed a lot of the situation of Women of the Wall, because it shook things up. Suddenly, this was talked about in mainstream Israeli news channels. So Israelis knew when Rosh Chodesh is, which is something they don't usually do. And this shifted things. Jews in the diaspora were looking towards Israel and saying, wait, what's all this about? We're good enough to support you and to be your backs, but then we might come to Israel and be arrested for something that we do in our synagogues every Shabbat, every morning. And this was a dramatical event, because then in 2013, in the end of the arrest, we went in front of a judge, and the judge ruled that Women of the Wall are praying according to the custom of the place, and they're allowed to pray the way they want in the Western Wall. So ever since 2013, we basically have a ruling from a judge saying that we're allowed to pray according to our custom, which is out loud, with talit, with tefillin, and with a Torah scroll. The authorities are still not on our side in a very obvious manner, okay? Every Rosh Chodesh when we pray we stand in the women's section. We're not allowed to use loudspeakers because you're not allowed to use loudspeakers in the Kotel. You need a special, a special permit from the Western Wall Heritage Fund. This is so, tour guides don't use their microphone and it disrupts the, so we have to pray with the voice of a shlichat tzibur, of a chazanit, which, strong as it is still out in an open area, and many people around. It's not easy. And the Western Wall Heritage Fund give that specific permit to use a loudspeaker on Rosh Chodesh in 7 in the morning in the men's section with a speaker to the women's section. It's obvious they're trying to, not be on our side. We're also not allowed to bring in Torah scrolls. A few years ago, I think maybe 15 years ago, a rule passed that you're not allowed to bring a Torah scroll from outside the Kotel in. There are 200 Torah scrolls for the public use. The Kotel, the Western Wall, is a public area funded by taxpayers' money in Israel, okay? I think 100 million shekel a year. And there are 200 Torah scrolls for the public use in the Kotel. You can only use them in the men's section. You can't bring a Torah scroll from outside because they don't want to, the idea makes sense. They don't want people to switch. A Torah scroll is an expensive thing. They don't want people to bring a non-kosher one, switch. I don't know. They have their reasons, but we also think they passed this regulation because of us. So we've had to smuggle Torah scrolls into the Kotel. Jewish women smuggling Torah scrolls. Again, we're religious. We care a lot about the Torah. We wouldn't do it in a way that isn't respectful, but we sometimes are successful and sometimes are. So sometimes we're able to read from Torah scroll and sometimes we're not. And that's something that's a problem that we're trying to work to change. So being this, doing activism on the ground, it shifts. There's always like the different angle, the different way that we need, but in the end it's a prayer. That's what kept me in Women of the Wall. I love the group. It's a wonderful community. When I pray in a conservative synagogue, an egalitarian synagogue, but the once a month praying in a sisterhood thing is very emotional for me, and I really, some of the most spiritual prayers that I had in my life was while being part of this amazing group. And a few years ago, I decided to try and broaden my activism arenas. And together with being an activist on the ground, I decided to turn to a bit more of a political arena of activism. And I joined Merkaz, which is the conservative movement's political entity in the World Zionist Congress. The World Zionist Congress is the one that was founded by Herzl in 1897, 130 years ago almost, in Basel, Switzerland. And Herzl, he wasn't the first Zionist. There were Zionists before Herzl going to the land of Israel and working the land and trying to create there something. But Herzl had two very good ideas. The first one was to create a movement, to create a political movement out of the Jewish people. And by creating this World Zionist Congress, bringing Jews together from all over the world, he created the Zionist movement, a political entity that was the one, that still is the one, that it makes us a people. Okay? All Jews from all over the world, then and now, are united together under the umbrella of the World Zionist Congress. The second thing Herzl did was make this movement a democratic movement. The first Congress was basically an explanation of how to now go back to the countries. He invited the people. But starting the second Congress, he sent these people back. He said, now you go back to your communities all over the world and you build federations And starting the second Congress year after, I want you to be elected officials, not you or people that would be elected. So they all went back, they all built federations, they all created an elective system, a democratic system in their different communities. And starting the Second World Congress in 1898, the people that came were elected officials, elected by their peers, by the people of their communities. And from then till now, that is what the World Zionist Congress is about. It's the umbrella of the Jewish people, it brings us together, but it's also the voices of different Jewish identities around the world. What happens in Israel is not what happens in France, and it's not what happens in Australia or in the United States. And each one of these communities sent their representatives to make their voices heard. And what the World Zionist Congress does is create a framework that thinks about the good of the Jewish people, what are the challenges, what are the goals of the Jewish people in a certain time. So if in the first years of the existence of the World Zionist Congress, the goal was to build, find a solution for the Jewish people that needed a solution, protect Jewish people in different communities, and find a solution. And the idea was to build a land in the state of Israel to create the state of Israel. So one of the first things that the World Zionist Congress did was to build one of its branches, which is Keren Kayemet L'Israel. It's the JNF in America, Jewish National Fund. In Israel, it's called Keren Kayemet L'Israel. That's what it was called when it was founded. It's still called like that in Israel, Kakal. And what Keren Kayemet L'Israel, that was founded in the beginning of the 20th century, did was fundraise with the little blue boxes that you might still have at home, right? Or in your schools, and your parents and grandparents that put money in these boxes fundraised to buy lands in the state of Israel. 17% of the land in Israel is owned by Keren Kayemet L'Israel today because of the fundraising that happened in the beginning of the 20th century. 17% of the land of Israel is a revenue of $2 billion a year. These $2 billion a year belong to us. They're an asset of the World Zionist Congress, not of the Jewish state, not of Israel, but of the Congress, the government of the Jewish people, which is the World Zionist Congress. So this is the biggest asset that belongs to us, the Jewish people. And today, we need to figure out how we maintain $2 billion a year to better the Jewish people. And to better the Jewish people, that's why it's so important that there are the different voices within the World Zionist Congress, because the different voices give us the opportunity to hear where all the money needs to be allocated, to learn about different Jewish frameworks, educational frameworks that can strengthen the Jewish people in different places in the world. And this is why it's so important that there are different voices and that all the representation of the Jews exists. So if in the beginning of the 20th century the idea was to make an Israel, 51 years after the first World Zionist Congress, there was a state of Israel. It was a very fast, relatively, historically looking, it was a relatively fast success. Herzl wasn't around anymore. He passed away in a very early age of 44, less than 10 years after the first World Zionist Congress. But he created such a good framework that it worked without him. It wasn't about him. And when Israel was established, there was, the question, does this World Zionist Congress, does it keep on going? We achieved the goal, but does it keep on going? And the understanding that I think was a good understanding was that yeah, the Israeli state is not the end of the Jewish people as outside of Israel or together. Not all Zionist Jews, as I'm sure many of you know, not all Zionist Jews live in Israel. Not all Jews live in Israel. And the concept of having a government of Jewish people or a body that represents all of us was important in 48 and it's important today. So they moved the Congress to happen once every 5 years, but it still exists. Every 5 years, 5 years there's a Congress, and every 5 years we sit together and we decide about the different goals and purposes of the Jewish people in the certain term. And then the different branches of the World Zionist Organization, I represent the World Zionist Congress. I represent the World Zionist, I sit in the board of the World Zionist Organization, which is like a small body from the World Zionist Congress. It's like a small executive, but we meet once a week. And what we do is to try and fulfill the goals of the Jewish people that were decided in the World Zionist Congress. So this happens every 5 years. There's elections. Every 5 years there's the Congress. Every 5 years we decide on our goals for the next term. But there are different bodies that work all the time to fulfill those goals. So if once the idea was to establish a Jewish state, today, after October 7th, we came together to change the goals of the specific term that we made in 2020. And the changes were, very straightforward if we think about it. Where do our resources go? They go to rebuilding the Gaza envelope. They go to rebuilding the towns in Israel that were ruined in the north. But not only, because it's not only about Israel. What are the Jewish people going through? And we know the Jewish people are going through threats of anti-Semitism that is rising around the world that we weren't expecting, or maybe we were. There were signs, but that became worse. And another branch of the World Zionist Congress is the Jewish Agency that sends shlichim, that sends ambassadors to different places. So, and that's another resource. It's not like a financial resource. It's another resource that we have as the Jewish people. And now we decide, where do we send the shlichim to strengthen Jewish communities? Maybe we need more help in campuses. Maybe we need more help in where are the Jewish communities that have had the worst time with anti-Semitism right now. And that's something that the World Zionist Congress is thinking about together, again, to better the Jewish people, because we have responsibility towards each other. Our responsibility is to fix Israel, to help Israel heal, and our responsibility is to try and bring down this rising of anti-Semitism around the world. Those are the goals of the Jewish people right now as a people. And because of our mutual responsibility towards each other, they're both, I don't know if equally is important, I don't know how you decide what's more important, but they're both important and we're doing both. So that's what we're doing in the World Zionist Congress. And the World Zionist Congress has elections every 5 years. I'm speaking about it because there are elections right now. Did you know? Yes. How many of you have voted? Okay, I would say half, maybe less than half. I represent the party of Merkaz, which is Slate 17. It's the party, it's the body representing the conservative Judaism. And what we are doing is trying to make our voices, the voices that want the Jewish people to stay a liberal Jewish people, and that the resources are allocated also to our denomination, and that we are seen in this, in this world of the World Zionist Congress. We are making sure that we're seen, that our voice is heard, that the anomaly of what's happening in Israel with regarding to who's a Jew and who is allowed to, that doesn't move over to the World Zionist Organization. And I'm saying this because 5 years ago was the first time that an ultra-Orthodox party started running in the World Zionist Congress. Up to 2020, the Haredim not the ultra-Orthodox. The modern Orthodox have always been part and have always sat around the table with us. But the Haredim, 5 years ago, decided they're also going to be part. Up to that moment, they weren't willing to call themselves Zionists. So they built a party in the United States. Okay, there are three groups that elect the delegates for the World Zionist Congress. One is Israel. Third of the delegates are represented by what happens in the Israeli government. So when I vote for the Israeli government, I vote for the World Zionist Congress. So all the Israeli political parties have seats in the World Zionist Congress. The Likud, Yesh Atid, Avodah, Meretz, not the parties that are not willing to regard themselves as Zionists, which is not the Arab parties and not the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox parties. So the ultra-Orthodox party wouldn't come from the Israeli part, but it did come from the United States. A group in the United States said, we're ultra-Orthodox, we want to call ourselves Zionists, and we want to run for the World Zionist Congress. Wonderful, I'm really saying it's good. The diversity, different voices, if they're Zionists, Brucha Ba'a, everyone is welcome around the table. It's also a legitimate Jewish voice. The problem is that in the elections of 2020, this party that ran for the first time got 20,000 votes. The conservative Merkaz got 15,000 votes. Okay? So this is important because we were underrepresented to, the conservative movement in the United States is larger than the ultra-Orthodox movement. It's larger. And this gave them a good number of seats around the table. The problem with this is not that they're being represented. They should be represented. The problem is, first of all, that they're not represented, that they should be, it's a democracy, then they're represented according to who voted for them, but we want to make sure that we are represented according to our true size in the United States or around the world. But the other problem is that they're bringing this discourse that we feel in the Kotel, in the Western Wall, every month. They're bringing it to the table, to the World Zionist Congress. When I remember there was this meeting a few years ago, I think it was, a few months into my first term as a representative, that the ultra-Orthodox representative was yelling at us for some reason, and he called us you crazy liberals. So the day after, we built a WhatsApp group with all our bloc calling it the crazy liberals, and we've been owning that ever since. We want to keep the World Zionist Congress liberal. We want to make sure that it represents the voices of Jews all over the world that are liberal Jews. And, one of the things that the Jewish Agency that I said is also a branch of the World Zionist Congress, meaning that the representatives as elected to the World Zionist Congress build the executive of the Jewish Agency. The Jewish Agency is in charge of Aliyah to Israel, meaning every Jew, it's a law that passed in 1948. One of the first laws passed in Israel was the law of return. Any Jew that wants to be a citizen of Israel leaves the airplane and you can become a citizen if you decide to. And the Aliyah is in the hands, Aliyah from outside of Israel is in the hands of the World Zionist Congress, of the Jewish Agency. So the concept of who's a Jew for the law of return is decided by the liberal voices sitting in the Jewish Agency. A convert from your synagogue is recognized as a Jew for the law of return, okay? If someone was converted here, she can come and live in Israel, and she would be recognized, she would get Israeli citizenship. The same convert, if she were to come to make her conversion in my synagogue in Rehovot, wouldn't be recognized for the law of return, because this is in the decision of the Jewish state of Israel, and this is the decision of the government of the Jewish people of the World Zionist Congress, And that's why it's so important that we, the World Zionist Congress, doesn't take to the place where the Israeli people are, because that is a situation that is not good, that we're trying to change from within. But we have to make sure together that the other issues don't change. And they don't, again, the ultra-Orthodox party doesn't need to be the majority to change this. They just need to form a bloc. And as we know in the Israeli political system, they have their partners that might form a bloc with them. In the government, they're working with the right-wing parties, and they're able to change things like that. Also in the World Zionist Congress, we want to make sure, and we've already heard threats or voices saying that they want to, first of all, that Reform and conservative Jews are the enemies of the Jewish people and whatever, and we know that they want to change the status quo within the Jewish people. And that's something that we have to change. The World Zionist Congress can affect Israel, and we don't want it to be the other way around. So I'll finish by saying that elections are going on now till the 4th of May, which is the Sunday that you're here for that wonderful program. I think you might have these cards somewhere outside. If you haven't voted, or even if you have, take them home on Motzei Shabbat. You just scan this, put it on your table or on your fridge in a place where you can see, and scan this. You go into the AZM site. The AZM site is the American Zionist Movement site, which is the Federation of America. You register, and then you pay $5, which is basically running the elections, running the American Zionist Movement, so it's up, not partial, and you're the ones that are funding it, okay? But it's also to prevent fraud, because you can only vote 4 people from 1 credit card, so you can't give the list of your synagogue members to the secretary and tell him, now vote for everyone. You can't. You have to pay for yourself. Your synagogue is not allowed to offer to pay for you. They're not allowed to give you anything for voting. You go, you vote. You register, you get a PIN number, then you vote for Slate 17 Merkaz. There's some other wonderful slates. You can look them up. I recommend Merkaz because we have great people, so I've heard. And we really want to represent you. We want to represent the voices of conservative Jews around the world. We want to make sure that our voice is represented according to our size in the American public, and we need you. We need the hands that were up here to be 100%. We need the people that did bring their hands up to go and think now of 5 more people that you can talk to them about this and tell them to vote to your partners, your kids, your parents, your neighbors, your co-workers. A person needs to be over 18, needs to be Jewish, needs to not have voted in the Israeli government, in the Israeli elections in 2022, the last elections, and a permanent resident of the United States. And you need to declare yourself as a Zionist Jew. There's like the Jerusalem platform that is there that you need to agree with. And that's it. It's very easy. And we need you, because not voting is voting. You know how democracies work. So thank you for listening to me, speaking and singing for a long, long time. You'll when you go home, you won't be hearing me anymore. So get it as much as you can. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to. Thank you.
Tammy will take a few questions. I'm going to ask Tammy to summarize a question if it's not very loud for the people we're streaming.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
So what defines a Jew to be able to vote?
She asked what defines a Jew to be able to vote. It's a self-definition of Jewish. You define yourself as a Jew. We understand that this might be a problematic issue in one hand, but we don't want them to start checking who's a Jew, because we know what happens when they check. I will say that we are, the representatives from all the parties are very much now alert to see that there aren't groups that are, cheating. Yeah, it's stuffing the ballot box. In the last election, the other third of the votes comes from the rest of the world, okay? So third Israel, third the United States, and third to the whole rest of the world. I'm saying this because in the last election in Brazil, there was a group of evangelistic Christians that were bought by the Likud party to vote, and we noticed that there's an increase of these names, Christian and all these Jorge. There were many names that it was very obviously not a Jewish public, and we stopped the elections there. So we are trying to be aware, but that being said, a person could vote, say he's Jewish, not be Jewish, and I don't know. Yeah, Levana. We'll go back. Yeah, sure.
Wasn't there a few years ago kind of an agreement, consensus?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't touch that. So Levana asked about the agreement in the Western Wall that made an egalitarian section. So in 2013, after the arrests that were making a big echo, Bennett, who was the Minister of of Diaspora Affairs at that point, built overnight an egalitarian section in the southern Western Wall. Okay, it's the same wall. He built an egalitarian section overnight on scaffolds. Built it in 2013, and then Women of the Wall, together with the reform and conservative movements and the Jewish Agency, went into negotiations what this place is going to look like when it becomes from temporary to permanent. In 2016, the agreement passed. We had an agreement, how they're going to build it, how much money is going to go in it. Agreement passed. In 2008, it was frozen. 18, sorry, by Netanyahu, who was also prime minister then, because of pressure from the ultra-Orthodox parties. So this temporary place still exists. It exists. The conservative movement, and I'm sure some of you might have been there, the conservative movement runs it, but voluntarily. And Women of the Wall, because we have the ruling of the judge from 2013 that we are allowed to pray in the women's section the way we want, and we're women's prayer group. There's no reason for us to go to the egalitarian section. For us, it was a compromise, and we will fulfill our part of the compromise when all sides do. But right now, we don't need to. So it's good. It exists for liberal Jews that want to pray egalitarianly. Many people go to pray there, even not only conservative and reform, people that want not to stand on a chair while their son is doing a bar mitzvah in the kotel. But still, it's not the solution that we need, and we are still fighting. So there's an agreement on the table. All the government needs to do is take the agreement and make it happen. But yeah.
I have a question. What other slates does Merkaz work with?
What's our block? So we work very closely with the reform movements Arza, or Artzeinu. They're slate 3. If you have reform friends, tell them. We work closely with them in the aspect of like a weekly meeting. We're almost like one party, but we still have differences, so we're not exactly. And then the other parties, it's a good question because the Israeli parties bring something, a left-right discussion to the table. But the World Zionist Congress isn't really that kind of discussion. So we're working with the liberal powers in the World Zionist Congress, which is, I would say, center-left of because some denominations, us, the Reform, are liberal denominations. And then the center parties in Israel, Yesh Atid, Kahol Lavan, Avodah and Meretz, but also Israel Beiteinu, which is a right-wing, very right-wing party in Israel, but represents liberal or secular right-wing people in Israel. So we sit with them, and because most of the issues are issues of like liberalism and the Jewish people, and where we take that.
Do you
Yeah.
Do you work out with Hatikva or Droshe?
Yeah, so Atikva is the Avodah and Meretz together.
And then, does Droshe Torah B'Tzion work with?
I'm not sure who they are. Sorry, no, but Atikva are strong in their Avodah and Meretz, and we work with them. I will say about the political party, the Israeli political parties and Atikva. They're a very important voice, but there's something about us being non-Israeli political that helps us, because in the end, the Avodah members in the World Zionist Congress still have ties to the Israeli political system. So they still need, funding for kibbutzim. And we don't have that. There's nothing that we need to leave the room in order not to vote for, because we might get screwed in the Knesset, synagogue, in the Knesset. So us not being part of the Israeli political system is actually good for us. Yeah.
I was going to ask something related.
Yeah.
Is there something you could recommend that we could read about how the World Zionist Congress operates after the election?
Yeah. I don't, even if you're going to Wikipedia, but it's really, because it's 130 years old, it's like a country, really. There's a constitution, and there's so many branches. But I'll say in large, there's the World Zionist Congress. Under the World Zionist Congress, there are 4 branches. The World Zionist Organization, which is like a smaller executive of the World Zionist Congress. The World Zionist Congress is 525 delegates. In the World Zionist Organization sit 36, which are mirrored, from the elections. So that's a World Zionist Organization. Then there's the executive of Kakal, of Keren Kayemet L'Israel, of the Jewish Agency, and of Keren HaYesod, which is like the modern fundraising entity. So those are the 4 main frameworks that work under. Many people work there, many people maintain but they're different executives. There's so much, and there's a constitution to the World Zionist. It's very complicated, but read in Wikipedia, and I'm sure you can start there. There's obviously a site of the World Zionist Congress. Yeah.
When we're between elections, is there anything that we can do from the diaspora to help women at the wall?
Yeah. Definitely. The elections are a big issue, but women of the wall, or Bichlal, in large, the liberal Judaism in Israel. We need your help to make Israelis understand that this is this is the most important issue for Jews in the diaspora regarding Israel. Now, I don't want to decide for you, but many times Israelis come to the United States, and it's the first time they ever meet liberal Judaism in their life. So if someone is coming to study here and comes to your synagogue, you ask about this, and they would have no idea that it's a problem. Did you hear about women? No. So if you talk about it and they understand that you care about this disturbs you, then they go back to Israel with this voice, representing the voice of the liberal Jews. Definitely when Israeli leaders come here. You can also watch Women of the Wall online if you're brave enough to stay up to 12. So you can do that. You can be, we have social how do you say? Social media presence, all of them. So follow us. Yeah, I'll go to this side.
Yeah, I have a slightly different kind of question. I'm concerned as an American Jew that all Zionist organizations, regardless of what people really know, the perception is that they're warmongers, hateful, controlling, and dangerous on the college campuses. This is going on all over the country, and it's causing a great deal of reactionary anti-Semitism. So what I'm basically asking is, how can we change the perception of Zionism in our most academic areas in this country, as well as our Jewish population?
Look,
Because that's what's going
I know, and I don't. I will say that I don't live. I don't have. I'm trying to. When I'm here, I'm trying to understand in the most deep way the experience of being a Jew in the diaspora, but I don't have it really. And what I feel is that it's okay to pass a judgment or to criticize the Israeli government. It's okay. Not everything that the Israeli government is doing is okay. I protest every Motzei Shabbat because I don't think the Israeli government is doing enough to, or doing anything to bring back the hostages. I have a lot of things that I think the Israeli government is doing wrong. And I think that separation between legitimate, criticism, thank you, legitimate criticism against the Israeli government and anti-Semitism, we have to hold that it's not exactly the same, because if we put all the criticism against the Zionist entities, then we might think that everything is anti-Semitism. So again, I don't know, because I don't live here, so it might yes be anti-Semitic, and it might be an excuse for people to be anti-Semitic. But I think we have to educate people to, to see the difference and to be able to pass judgment or even to protest against what's happening in Gaza. That's okay, but there's a line between doing that and burning a house of a congressman. There's a line. So I'm guessing but we need to work. We need to educate. We need to educate the young adults, the Jewish adults that are dealing with it, the young non-Jews that are creating that are missing the line, that are blurring the line. It's a hard work. I know. Yes. You live in the, yeah. Look, when I was praying and looking, when I was sitting there looking out of that window, all you see is beautiful views. Everything is perfect, so it's a beautiful world. Yeah.
Just a quick question. You mentioned your synagogue in Rehovot. Is there a conservative synagogue that you pray in now that you're living in Jerusalem?
There are a few next to my house. I don't pay the membership. So I pay the membership to the synagogue in Rehovot. There's a synagogue called Mayanot, very close to where I live. So that's the one I go to the most, but not always. There's one called Zion, which is not far, and one called Moreshet Avraham. I live in the south of Jerusalem, so there are a few, and one called Moreshet Avraham, which is where I have family, so I also go there sometimes. You know the congregations? You asked because you have...
I've been to one of them, so I was just curious.
Okay.
One more question and then we'll...
Yes.
let,
Okay. You were saying one more question, so... I'm still here. Yes, please.
Helen can take the last
Helen, it's because it's my mother's name, so...
It's a question that somebody needs to say to me. I was going to ask you afterwards. I tried to vote.
Yeah.
I got on the website, signed everything,
Yeah.
and very honorably you have to say that you will accept text messages. I don't text. I'm old fashioned and don't text.
Yeah.
So I didn't click. I couldn't move forward.
I'll help you.
Okay. Yeah. I will say there's also...
I called the message.
So what I recommend again is to do it with someone, and if there's no way to do it online, there's also paper ballots, but then you have to pay, you have to pay with checks. But you send, but that's also a possibility. But if anyone has problem, then everyone here, you have my emails, and again, you have people in your kehila, and again, I ask you, whoever didn't vote, okay? So wait, who didn't vote yet? Okay, who did not vote? Other people, look at them, ask them tomorrow, ask them next week if they voted, and spread the word. We need the word spread, and
What is your party name or number again?
Merkaz 17. You have to go down, scroll down, and Thank you very much, and a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you.
I also want to thank Beth Israel 360 Group
Nachon.
for sponsoring this event.
Thank you.
So we have cards, there are bookmarks and other cards with the Merkaz information.
Like this.
on the table. There are also cookies